Vella died this afternoon. And I know he was someone I knew personally. I'm sure many of you knew him as well. And when we think about transatlantic partnership, ultimately transatlantic partnership is made up of people. And Guido Westerwelle was one of those individuals who contributed to transatlantic partnership in his many roles. And those of us who knew he was ill, I think, were hopeful that he was recovering. But apparently he declined quite precipitously over these past few weeks. So I just wanted to pay a little tribute to Guido Westerwelle and the contribution he made to transatlantic partnership during his too short life. So thank you.
That we have new opportunity.
Ladies and gentlemen, before the next session, a short presentation on the BF Connect app.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dujardin. I'm with the German Marshall Fund. Just give us a second. Yes, thank you. Thank you. My name is Dhruva Jaishankar. I'm a fellow with the German Marshall Fund.
I'm Cyriac Kuvas from SpotMe, who developed the app.
And we're going to just take a few minutes to show you some of the features of the SpotMe application. Part of the reason why we use this is to bring this conference into the 21st century. We hope that you find this useful. But there are several aspects that are new this year. And so we thought we'd feature some of them. And particularly for people who've not attended Brussels Forum before, we thought we'd feature some of the application's benefits for you.
So I'm just going to start quickly about the homepage. So as you can see on all the screen, you have a homepage from where you can see all the upcoming session, you can access your agenda, you can see as well all the tweets, and you can access to the partner page. Then I think we're gonna start.
Yes, there are a few other applications. You can exchange business cards, and this will appear in your briefcase. And the briefcase is on the top there. But you can exchange business cards by basically taking a picture of the code that you have on people's badges, and you'll get an email a little bit after the conference is over, which will have the personal details, the contact details of the people that you have documented. But we have a few other features that are interactive, and we'll be using over the next few sessions and throughout the conference. One of them is the voting. You will see something come up quite like this, and basically you'll be asked to vote on a multiple choice question. You can also submit questions and comments via the app, and we will periodically be featuring on the screens here some of the questions and comments that you will be submitting via this application. A third interactive feature is the word cloud, and you see that on the left-hand side. And we'll actually just do a quick demonstration of this because we're going to be using this in the next session. So if you could all take a minute or so to bring out your applications and bring out your devices, and please open up the word cloud function. I'll just give you a minute. Few seconds to do that. And what we're going to do, this is the question that we're being asked. In one word, what is the biggest existential challenge facing Europe today? So we'll start the counter. It's 40 seconds. You have 37 seconds now to put in something.
Cool.
So we see populism, liquor. Somebody's been having a little bit to drink. Russia, growth. Russia is getting bigger. Migration, leadership, fragmentation. Okay, we have 9 more seconds, 8. Okay, so the time is up, and we see that there's quite clearly a proverbial elephant in the room. But this is just indicates, basically, this is almost a little bit like a straw poll. And the words that appear largest are the ones that have been inputted by the largest number of people.
So then I'm gonna just come back to the app. And I just wanted to show you basically that you can access to all the speaker list, all the participant list, and as well you can take notes from the app directly. All the notes are auto-saved and it will be sent it back to your email after the event. So you will have a link, you can click on the link and you can access to a web page which is personalized and where you can access all the documents that you put in your briefcase. Then the last thing I wanted to show you is the background materials. So if you get their backgrounds here, there you have a full list of different elements. If you go for China Silk Road, for example, so the first one, yeah, and you open it. Let's open the document. You can have access, for example, to like the full map, everything. So there's a lot of materials in there, as well as the new NATO document that has been released today. So please don't hesitate to watch them and put them in your briefcase if you want to have them back after the event.
And finally, if you have any questions about the application and how to use it, there's a helpful tutorial and Get Social on the bottom left-hand corner. You can also ask logistics, which is a way of contacting. You can also always talk to people in the front who will be able to help you with the application.
Yeah,
the help desk.
exactly. And thank you very much. That's it.
Yeah, thank you very much, and we hope you make good use of this application.
Yeah, thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the London Bureau Chief of the New York Times, Mr. Stephen Erlanger.
Okay, very good. Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here. Thank you for your patience. We're going to have a bit of an experiment here because our theory is even GMF can't live from NATO alone. And as we heard in her wonderful declaration this morning from Margaret Macmillan, whose book on the First War I really do recommend, as well as her book on Paris 1918, there is a world of soft power that matters terribly and a world of cultural power. And I have the privilege to try to open this conversation in the context of all the disorder about which we're speaking with Paul Dujardin, who is the head of what's known here as BOZAR, which is the Center for Fine Arts in Brussels. Now, BOZAR, you've probably seen it. It's not really spelled in any French way or English way. It's kind of a Belgian Esperanto, which is a good symbol, really, of what it means for this capital of Europe, because it's an institution for cultural and political debate that comes under the Prime Minister of Belgium's office. And Paul has been running it since 2002, I think. So our theory, my theory was, in this world of, as we've all heard, very significant disorder, we should try at least to talk a little bit about what defines us, what holds us together. And part of what holds us together are our democratic values, but also our cultural values, the things we find beautiful, the things we find aesthetic, the things that actually matter to us, that are part of our sensibility, our respect for the individual, our respect for creativity. So here we are to talk about soft power. And the interesting thing to me, as Paul and I were talking, Russia was big on your word cloud, and clearly the idea of a revanchist Russia is much on everyone's minds. But I started going to Russia in 1985, and I lived there for a while. And one of the things that struck me about the collapse of the Soviet Union was the power of cultural diplomacy. It wasn't just Reagan's spending, it was blue jeans and jazz and the Beatles, and the sense the Russians had that in the West there might be a better way of living. So the first thing, Paul, I want to ask you about is there a cultural path forward to hold faith with this new Russia, which seems to be turning back in a very modern way to the past?
Well, thank you for inviting me. I think that in the first place, as BOZAR was founded just after the First War, and Europe was devastated. And the whole 19th century, we were looking to a national identity. I think that it was interesting that first place BOZAR, to contextualize a little bit, BOZAR was a unique new model where, as an institution, it was not like museums were to conserve or to present artworks, but in the first place to be a place of community building. And as Europe was there what it was after the First War, it was interesting to see that we opened BOZAR in between 27 and 29 with the Russian avant-garde. And already we were 10 years after the revolution. It was interesting to see that we had not to judge, but we wanted to create and to build bridges, knowing that the migration from Russia was enormous already during the first period of revolution and end 19th century up to the First War. In 89, and in between the Cold War, Brussels was an important place of dialogue. BOZAR was the first place of the World Congress of Migrants, Scientists, Artists, Jewish, to go back to Israel or to come to the West. And it was like a cultural platform in competition between the Queen Elizabeth competition, as maybe some of you know, was in Brussels. It was one of these platforms between East and West, between America and Europe and Russia. And all the debate of public diplomacy and propaganda was going on. 89, an enormous migration from Russia and from the Soviet space of intellectuals left, knowing that we know today maybe 60% of the Metropolitan Opera are Russian musicians. And so even Gergiev is one of these leading intellectuals who rebuilt this country in the 90s. I remember that I met him the first time going to Siena with 4 buses with about 150 musicians to give conducting courses in 91. And it was to bring currencies to rebuild. But I know that the St. Peter's Opera House, about 15,000 people in one other hand were related, didn't leave because Gergiev was building up. Today we know, and I don't want to judge, but we created really a platform that we create these bridges. Even we know that Valery Gergiev, one of the leading intellectuals, has these relations with Putin. And that's the difference between today, how we have keeping these doors open. It was said from the beginning in these multilateral relations, and what was said by the Secretary General of the NATO, it's not my task. BOZAR is not a political platform, but our common imaginary and is there to still going on to work together.
Do you think these same methods that worked in the past can work in this new world of social media propaganda and trolling and Russia today?
But we don't have to be naive. We see what happens. We know what happened on the Duma and their decisions that all think tanks mostly has to leave. Soros Foundation and many others NGOs had to leave. At the same time, we see that even for Russia or for China, with one of the most important dissidents, Ai Weiwei, it has, at one hand, giving more access to this propaganda as a leverage, but at the other hand, we have more views on what is going on. So it's another balance in this whole discussion we have today.
As he likes to say, the world is not east or west, it's a sphere. Ai Weiwei.
Absolutely, and it's interesting to see when Ai Weiwei was in New York, beginning of the 80s, because many people were shocked when Ai Weiwei was making these pictures on Lesbos. I must say, they are not really conscious from where Ai Weiwei came when he already in the 80s went around with his camera, having the experience of iconoclasm, destruction of culture in China during the Cultural Revolution. His father was a famous artist and poet who had to go in jail because freedom of speech was not accepted. So Ai Weiwei knows how he can deal with these digital power.
Yes, I mean this sort of powerful thing he did, I think, in Berlin when he took all of the life vests and packed columns of a building with life vests. I mean, one of the things that obviously interests people here too, and the European Council, is migration. And part of the fear of migration, which even Herr Schulz talked about earlier, was the fear of the other, the fear of a cultural identity being undermined or swamped by this new migration, by Islam. And here in Belgium, I mean, you've just had a state of emergency not very far from here after the November attacks. Your own museum's not very far from the Jewish Museum where there were murders in the name of Islamic terrorism. And I wonder whether you think there's something cultural diplomacy can help Europeans in terms of their relationship to the newcomers, in their relationship to Islam.
I think in any form of extremism, it's important. I think the relation for us is certainly in culture is the element of education. We learn from our parents the values, and I think that's important that even on that level, this interculturality must be a DNA from all our arts institutions. And that's mainly, I would say, under pressure of development, political authorities need to change, but also the bottom up. Our institutions, or mostly our museums, are mostly very conservative. And we want to protect our cultural values and our cultural heritage. But if we can put that in a dialogue of exchange and create a mutuality, and not only export in the sense of propaganda, and that we can bring in and have this multilateral dialogue, what was stimulated inside Europe by the Council of Europe in '54, when we had the arts and cultural agreement on cultural diversity, minorities, human rights, and so on. We have to make it more global. We have to make that today 28 million Europeans coming from the African continent. We have this reality who is there. Even these artists and coming from there and community want to find their own identity. And we created this more Afro-European community. So we have this diversity who's here. So with who we have to create a new relation.
You were telling me before about a project you had in mind called Close the Curtains. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I would say globally, it's the difficulty is that we don't want to see what's going on, and even in our European narratives, we had the First War, the Second World War, '89, and of the communism. Levinas wrote a fantastic text in the '80s about the Second World War, and he remembers us that Hitler sitting in a train, seeing all these refugees, and even Hitler, sewing that, asked to one of his officers to close the curtain. Because he could have empathy. And so that's one of the problems today. We don't want to see what is going around. But at the same time, again, don't be naive. we have to to solve the problem here, but we have to solve the problem there. And I was visiting Lebanon, where you see that 2.5 million migrants live in that small country with the numbers of inhabitants. Going around in Europe and Middle Europa and Central European countries, most of the countries where this type of fear, without being well informed, you have today not really this problem of migrations like we know in other places of Europe. So it's so unbalanced.
Yeah. I mean, very often my experience has been that the greatest fear about migration tends to be from areas that don't have any migrants.
Absolutely.
I mean, this is true of Wilders, it's true of AfD, it's true of lots of things. But can art help us open the curtains? I mean, and how do you do that? Do you do that through exhibition or what?
But you see it in I think the European narratives from the arts world. I think if we don't understand anymore what politicians say through their parliamentary work, what is their task to do, it's incredible to see if we look to the European cinema or European literature from the recent years of the Golden Bear was giving in Berlin 2 weeks ago, you see that European artists are very conscious on the most complex narratives or elderly people or corruption or migrant problems or religious problems are very well handled, and I think that was one of the problems of Europe, that it was a subsidiarity. I hope that in these countries where we need to work with, even Russia, China, Turkey, that the element of people to people and exchange, and certainly the element was most successful for Europe from the recent decade was the Erasmus project, giving the opportunity of European students from these 600 million Europeans to go there and to study and to have exchange. I think if we want to create a new generation, and that's a part of cultural and education, it's not only an element of arts. It's our common identity by the arts production of Europe, seeing these narratives inside as outside of Europe, stimulating that, and I must say personally for my arts institute, is opening it for all these communities. And we are still too much exclusive. We see it from the UK, we learned it there, the last decades, UK mostly was working on that. The British Council, for example, besides giving language courses, the social community building is inside Europe much more present than in the other European countries. And I hope that we can create with Russia, with China, with Iran, common project we can exchange of our values, recognizing what they do, and that's a way of making these soft power happen. It's not on the agenda of the hard power.
Right. Well, we were talking a bit about Iran, and there's a new opening. I mean, there's a new opportunity anyway. We'll see what happens with the Ayatollah Khamenei, but clearly in Iran, I remember once a French ambassador telling me that Iran was very important, which I knew anyway, but he said it's a real country. He said it has a film industry. And I wonder, I mean, what kinds of projects do you think there's a whole generation in Iran that's very eager to be part of the world, that, wants to deal with social media, that wants to understand Europe better. There's a fight going on. What sort of projects do you think might work to keep faith with those young people in Iran?
First, it's like some of the other regions of the world. I think 80% of the population in Iran is under 40. They even don't know what happened before the revolution. So they were educated after that. At the same time, Iran the culture of the Persian is as important than China and India and Europe. Today, and my team was already many times in Iran the last years. We were even member of the international theater film festivals and so on. We brought already many theater performances all over Europe. We are already in Iran, in the intellectual arts world, farther than the political world. I remember that in the biggest festival, like Holland Festival, Festival of the Town in Germany, by our good element of education, we wanted to explain how difficult it was for these actors to do their work. They were very shocked. They didn't want to have this contextualization. They wanted to come to Europe to do their work. And they were so experienced that their narrative, they could bring it in their way. So the diaspora from Persia in Europe, as the link is today so developed already that the element that we know from the censorship, they overcome already that. They are already in another stadium. So globally, but at the same time, when the British Council and the UK embassy had to close and the embassy was burned in 2010, if I remember, the same year, Gregor, the director of the British Council, the British Museum, was sending this Cyrus cylinder, who was referring to the first document on human rights to Iran. A lot of people in the UK were opposed that cultural heritage would be exported to Iran in 2010. It was a big success. So,
there.
yeah,
Absolutely.
and so also on that level, and during the whole time of revolution, they were, and that was propaganda from the Iran side to sell their 5,000 years of cultural heritage. Today, here in Brussels, when the 9 commissioners will go in mid of April to Iran, I think we need to find another way of working together. An exchange from both sides, working together with respect from our European side, from our values, and to find a platform where the values we defend in Europe, we can share with them.
I think that's particularly important because in the end, the EU was instrumental in the opening to Iran in the first place. And I think it's very important to keep up this kind of relationship, particularly in a Middle East that's as muddled as we have it. We've got a bit of time left, and I was hoping that we could have a few questions from the floor. Questions about BOZAR, which will be hosting us tonight, questions about cultural diplomacy, questions about projects that might work, ideas. If you have questions, we'd love to have a couple and give you a second to think about it. And if not, we will talk about... Yes, sorry. Yes, please. Do we have a microphone? Yes, thanks. Please
yes.
Identify yourself.
Yeah,
as well.
my name is Youssef Amrani. I'm from Morocco. You have asked a very important question, but Nick didn't have any answer. When you were talking about Islam...
I'm used to that, by the way.
And I think we have to insist on this counter-narrative, because today, you're talking about Islam. Today, Islam is being hijacked by a minority. And today, the most important thing, I think the priority should be how to have a counter-messaging, to deconstruct the jihadist narrative. I think this was your question, and we want to react. I think that today the extremists are, the violent are controlling the internet, we need the platform, and we need the messaging. And I think I want you to react to this question, please.
Okay. Absolutely, you're right. And these realities is also handled by BOZAR. Today, and it's an interesting model. You need also the competence. And in BOZAR, we try to organize us since 2010, when Belgium had the presidency of the European Union. We had 2 summits, one on Africa, Europe. another one with the ASEM countries. And it was giving the opportunity at 2008, when we had to prepare that Herman Van Rompuy was the prime minister. And I could convince Herman Van Rompuy, who had to become the president of the council, that an institution as BOZAR could be a multilateral platform in Brussels, in the capital of Europe. But then we had to make a new type of organization that for each of the disciplines, like you have all over the world, from Kennedy Center to Lincoln Center, Metropolitan, Centre Pompidou, that you have directors of disciplines, theater, dance, architecture, cultural industries. We started uniquely in that period to have horizontal directors in a sense of holistic approach and a geopolitical approach, to have BOZAR Africa, to have BOZAR Middle East, to have BOZAR Americas, BOZAR Asia, with people who are not art historians or curators, but people who have another background. Our BOZAR Africa director is an economist, worked in the Getty on these topics. And it was interesting to see that we were giving platforms to different communities in Brussels, as in the Middle East, related to religious questions, and on a more humanistic approach, what we had in these countries, and even by Sufi music, Sufi culture, even during the Turkish Europalia we had on the Ottomans, it was interesting to see even, I think that the Anatolian perception of Erdogan today wants to open each middle-sized city for touristic projects, but also for propaganda, Anatolian museums. Everything is recuperated on that level. So the political, art historical, religious element is interesting to see how each of the countries are recuperating that. We started immediately to work with Egypt on a very important European multilateral project, but on an equal basis, where this iconographic, historical, religious history from the more Christian community up to the Muslim and Islam community, all of the history, as an historical, because we are as an arts institution, we are not an institution to bring historical approach. But if we can combine in the narrative of our exhibition, our performance, the different narratives, the contemporary, as the historical background, what was the first speech, but at the end, it's always the result of the quality, the exclusive quality of the artworks.
Yes.
But at the same time, if I said we went from 300,000 visitors to 1,300,000 visitors in a city of 1 million, is that we created an art center who became inclusive for all the communities in the city.
Well, but I mean, part of what's interesting to me, and it's a very hard question to get to, is, you know, having been based in France and Germany and Britain now, there's not just a misunderstanding or confusion about what Islam is among European populations, but very often among European Muslims themselves, because the level of education about their own religion, particularly in a country like France, which has laïcité, is very narrow and has been hijacked in a way by some of the wrong people. It's not something museums can do by themselves, but this sense of, you know, this is a major culture and so on, I think is very important. Let's see if there are other questions, maybe. Just, do we have, right, please.
Heinrich Kräftschirm from Ministry.
Yes, thank you.
I have a question on the tools for cultural diplomacy, the tools for spreading our values. If you look at how it was done in the past, when the elites in the world watched BBC or CNN or Deutsche Welle in our case, nowadays many listen to and watch Al Arabiya, Al Jazeera, Russia Today, CCTV. So do we still have the tools today as we had still 10, 15 years ago?
I think we improved. The problem is that for all of us is to have the right elements to make the right evaluation, to evaluate what we are looking to, because we have so many information coming to us. So again, I can only answer to element of education and to try to find the right way. And that's the way by that BOZAR became also beside the best platform, because at the end, if we can do what we do, is again, because it's the best art institution, to try to be one of the best artists in the world, and beside others, and at the same time to be an agora where people can meet and defend their ideas. Even we will organize a debate with the Oxford Fellows on the Brexit. So at the same time, you need and you said it very well, where you referred in the 60s, 70s, 80s, you had certainly public media from a very high standard, but we were in the Cold War with propaganda on the other side, in the Soviet space, and you had on the American side the public diplomacy. Europe is very young in that. It's only now with the new Commission that they did really try to have this cultural diplomacy. Some diplomats asked me last month, what is cultural diplomacy? About what is going. So there's certainly not a serious and a respect for what cultural diplomacy could be. And I would give an example. Mogherini, when she came in power, it was the first time that somebody in that position came to BOZAR to meet all African ACP diplomats. They had a morning discussion together. It was not so before. There was never, before Mrs. Mogherini, a dialogue. Is that only the respect of a dialogue of the people representing their community here in Brussels? It starts already there, and BOZAR could be an element of giving that platform.
That's
Coming
great.
back to religion, don't forget, and there I refer to Peter Sloterdijk, one of the most famous philosophers, was always speaking about 1,000 years of war between Christians and Protestants, between France and Germany. So the problem of what we were experiencing in Europe, finding some living together in our community and in this region, in Brussels, we will have this anniversary in this year of 450 years ago. We started with our iconoclasm in Flanders, in the Low Countries. So we only have to remember, and that's important in what we try to do, is that this 15th, 16th century, what happened, and we had a high degree of education in the Low Countries, inventing Flemish painting, polyphony, but at the same time, we had also this enormous destruction of war on religious level. 50 years later, we had the 30th year of war in Germany, where 80% of Germans were dying. 80%, 30 years. And the war ended because no men were anymore there. So it's clear to see that what was said in the beginning of the conference, the historical facts, Roman Empire, First War, and so many other tools of multilateral platforms to make happen that we can find a dialogue. And in the cake, Arts Institute are very small platform where artists, intellectuals, and scientists can be a part of the debate. That's the only thing we can say on that level.
Which is a good place to stop, and thank you. It's a good reminder of the dangers of cultural arrogance also. And it sounds like your institution is at least striving to be open to the world. It sounds like your institution is at least striving to be open to the world. But here we have to end it. And thank you very, very much, Paul.
Thank you.
Here we have to end it. And thank you very, very much, Paul.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Richard Louis from MSNBC and NBC. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Richard Louis from MSNBC and NBC.
And good afternoon, Brussels Forum. Now we shift gears and we move into the topic of jobs and growth. And good afternoon, Brussels Forum. Now we shift gears and we move into the across the Atlantic. And to set up this discussion before we topic of jobs and growth across the Atlantic. And to set up this discussion before we get to our very esteemed panelists, a short video.
Although the recovery from the financial crisis of 2008 has been steady, especially in the United States, it has left deep scars on both sides of the Atlantic. In the US, unemployment numbers are down, but the quality of new jobs and lagging wage increases have tainted the overall picture. In Europe, the unsolved economic crisis has exhausted many countries and brought the Eurozone area to the brink of collapse. In addition, austerity measures and stricter budget rules in response to the crisis have put pressure on established social welfare systems. Both sides of the Atlantic are struggling to remain competitive in the global economy and to develop the skills that will fill the jobs of tomorrow. Where will robust and durable economic growth come from?